My name is Dale Pruitt. I've been driving for almost 18 years, and I've never been afraid of truck noise. Trucks make noise. Engine, suspension, poorly stowed cargo, sometimes even the wind coming in through a crack you swear you closed. But what I heard that night on the highway coming from Jackson, sometime between midnight and 1 in the morning, was nothing like that. It was a knocking sound coming from under the cab, irregular, as if something was trying to find a rhythm, and couldn't. It wasn't mechanical. Mechanical sounds have patterns. This didn't. Then I looked at the passenger floor and saw the wrench I keep attached to the side holder was on the floor, about 2 feet off where it should be. I had left Meridian shortly before noon, carrying automotive parts to a warehouse in Hattiesburg. Standard cargo, nothing special. And the plan was to arrive before 8 o'clock at night and still pick up a second delivery leaving from there to Biloxi early in the morning. But I left late because of a problem with the truck bed seal, and then I spent the whole afternoon pushing the schedule back, stopping as little as possible, eating inside the truck. When the crashes started, I already had about 11 hours of driving under my belt, and my head was working in that automatic mode that any trucker knows, where you're awake, but not fully present. The stretch of highway where I was didn't have much traffic, just a few farm lights far from the road and the occasional truck passing in the opposite direction. I know that truck better than I know my own house. Every unusual noise, every out-of-the-ordinary vibration, every time the suspension responds differently depending on the asphalt. And it was precisely this knowledge that made me make a mistake. I heard the impact, processed it mentally, and arrived at the easiest conclusion available. Some part of the truck bed came loose due to the road vibrations. It happens. It's happened before. What I didn't do, and what I still can't stop thinking about to this day, was check the tool compartment under the cab before leaving Meridian. I have this habit of checking everything before a long trip, but that day, the delay with the seal threw me off routine, and I skipped that part. I went straight up, started the engine, and drove off. I saw the wrench on the ground, registered it as something strange for a couple of seconds, and kept going. 11 hours on the road does that to you. It turns signal into noise. About 3 miles later, I saw a sign for a gas station, a chain I recognize, and decided to stop less out of genuine concern, and more because I needed coffee, and to stretch my legs anyway. The knocking had decreased somewhat in the last few minutes, or I had gotten used to it. I can't say exactly which. And I was almost convincing myself again that it was something to do with the truck bed when I parked next to the gas station and turned off the engine. The silence was immediate and complete. And then, in the silence, came a knock. Just one, coming from under the cab. I got out slowly, walked around the truck first for no specific reason, checked the tires, checked the truck bed, everything normal. Then I went to the tool compartment, which is built into the cab on the passenger side. A long, low space where I keep wrenches, chains, and some emergency equipment. The latch was visually in the correct position, but when I put my hand on it, I felt that it wasn't completely closed. There was a small gap that shouldn't be there. I picked up the wrench from the floor before opening it. I don't know exactly why. I think it was instinct. I held it with both hands and unlocked the compartment. The man who came out was large, taller than I expected for a space that size, and it took him a second to straighten up completely. He spoke before I could process what I was seeing, said he didn't want any trouble, that he just needed to cross the state, and that he would pay me well to keep quiet. His voice was too calm for the situation. That was the detail that disturbed me most at that moment, more than his presence itself. I stood there holding the wrench, unable to say anything, for about 3 or 4 seconds. The man repeated that he would pay me well, this time slowly pulling a wallet from his pocket as if to show that his movements were confident. He mentioned an amount. I don't remember exactly how much, but it was enough to attract the attention of any tired truck driver in the middle of a Mississippi highway at dawn. And I realized I was listening, not agreeing, but listening, weighing things up. And that bothered me more than anything else because it meant that fatigue was affecting my judgment in a way I wasn't properly controlling. He stood about 6 feet from me, not getting any closer but not backing away either, and continued speaking in a low, controlled tone about how simple it was, how nobody needed to know anything. I was holding the wrench, but my posture had relaxed without me realizing it, and he must have noticed because he took half a step toward me while he spoke, casually, as if it were natural. I asked his name. He replied that the name didn't matter, that what mattered was the money and the silence, and smiled in a way that didn't fit the situation at all. It was at that moment that the cell phone in my pocket vibrated twice in quick succession, the county's emergency alert pattern, and I looked reflexively without thinking. The screen lit up with a notification from the local sheriff's alert system, photo attached, name, description. It took me about 2 seconds to connect the face in the photo with the face in front of me, and when I did, my stomach churned. The notification said, homicide. He was watching me look at the screen. He moved quickly toward a man who had been bent over in a compartment for hours, which caught me by surprise. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He just lunged straight at me with his hand outstretched toward the wrench, and I involuntarily took a step back, which was enough for him to get close enough. We both grabbed the wrench at the same time, and I felt his weight pushing me against the side of the truck, my back hitting the metal with a sound that echoed in the empty parking lot. He was stronger than I expected and was looking me in the eyes without expressing anything. No anger, no despair, just determination. And that was the scariest thing of all. I dropped the wrench and screamed. I screamed loudly, without formed words, just volume. The kind of noise you make when your brain completely shuts off the filter. It wasn't courage. It was pure panic. The man took a half step back with the wrench in his hand, looked at the gas station, looked at me, and for about 2 seconds he was frozen in that decision. I kept yelling and banged my open hand on the side of the truck several times in a row, the metallic noise mixing with my voice, and I saw a light turn on inside the gas station. The employee opened the glass door and the man ran out towards the back of the parking lot, disappearing into the darkness beyond the gas station's lighting. I stood leaning against the truck with trembling hands, trying to talk to the employee who was asking me what had happened, but the words wouldn't come out in order. He picked up the phone and called 911 before I could even ask, and I stood there staring at the open compartment under the cab, trying to understand how I hadn't noticed anything in 11 hours on the road. The police arrived in about 12 minutes, and the first 2 officers who got out of the patrol car approached me with their hands on their guns, ordering me to move away from the truck and keep my hands visible. I understood immediately that, from their point of view, I was an unknown party to the situation, but understanding didn't make it any easier to stand there with my hands raised in a gas station parking lot at 2 a.m. while they searched my cab. They seized the truck as a crime scene, sealed everything off, and I spent the rest of the night in a room at the local police station, answering the same questions in different orders, while the delivery in Hattiesburg became a delay, then a cancellation, then a contractual problem. The man was caught 2 days later in a neighboring town, which theoretically ended my part in the case, but in practice ended nothing. The investigation into how he had gained access to the compartment, whether I knew, whether I had facilitated it, whether I had received money, continued for weeks. My agent found out before I could explain. The story circulated in the sector in a distorted way, and 2 clients canceled contracts without giving a formal explanation. But I knew the reason. I spent 23 days without a confirmed route waiting for the department to issue the document, stating that I had no involvement. When the document arrived, it was a page-and-a-half bureaucratic language without any apology. 23 days of investigation, 2 lost contracts. The truck stopped for almost a week while the investigation was finished, and what I received was a page-and-a-half saying I was exonerated. I did the math once and stopped because the number didn't help at all. What weighed most heavily wasn't the financial aspect, but knowing that in 11 hours on the road I hadn't noticed anything, and that if my cell phone hadn't vibrated at that specific moment, I probably would have accepted the money and continued the trip. Today I check the entire truck before every trip, no matter the delay, no matter the customer waiting on the other end of the phone. Tool compartment, cargo bed, under the cab, everything. It's become as mechanical a routine as checking the tires and verifying the cargo seal, and most of the time I do it without thinking. I just execute the sequence and climb in. But every time I get to the compartment under the cab and put my hand on the latch, there's a second, just one, where I hold it before opening it. It's not conscious hesitation. It's my body remembering something that my head has tried to organize into words several times and never quite managed to. The compartment is always empty when I open it. It always has been ever since that night. But I keep opening it. I keep looking. I keep waiting for the silence to confirm what I already know I'll find. Some colleagues who know the story ask if I regret stopping at that gas station, as if the alternative was better, as if I had chosen something on purpose. I don't know how to answer that properly because the truth is I didn't stop on instinct. I stopped for coffee and a numb leg, and the rest happened on top of that. I started keeping the wrench inside the cabin, in the glove compartment, on the driver's side. I don't know exactly why. I guess I don't need to. That first story was chilling, wasn't it? If you're enjoying these accounts, please hit the like button right now. It really helps the channel out. To help YouTube recognize this content and share it with more people, I have a small favor to ask. Leave a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. This kind of interaction is vital for our community's growth. Now, brace yourself, because the next story is even more disturbing. There's something I've never been able to explain in a way that makes sense to someone who doesn't drive, which is how you can do everything right, every step, every check, every decision within the protocol, and still end up stopped on the side of Interstate 25 with $90,000 worth of vaccines being lost in the heat inside the truck bed. Ronnie Castillo, 16 years on the road, never failed an inspection, never lost cargo due to negligence. What happened to me in New Mexico wasn't negligence. I just didn't know yet that trusting a well-known franchise could be exactly the mistake someone was expecting me to make. I had left Albuquerque at 5:40 a.m. with a shipment of vaccines destined for a network of clinics in Colorado Springs. It was a refrigerated shipment, with the temperature constantly controlled between 36 and 46 degrees Fahrenheit, with no margin for error. The contract was with a pharmaceutical distributor I'd been working with for almost 3 years. Payments were always on time, no complaints, the kind of client you don't want to lose. The refrigeration unit was working perfectly when I left. I checked it twice before closing the truck bed. The estimated delivery time was about 4.5 hours, a comfortable one for a weekday morning. The problem with the stretch of Interstate 25 heading north from Albuquerque is that it looks easy on the map, but it's not on the road. The terrain climbs progressively. There are long uphill stretches where the engine works hard, and gas stations don't appear as frequently as you'd expect. I knew I'd need to fill up before Santa Fe because I left with a less than full tank, a decision I'd made 1,000 times before without any consequences. When I saw the gas station sign, I didn't think twice. It was a franchise I knew, the kind of place where you fill up, grab a coffee, and leave in 15 minutes. The gas station attendant was a man in his 40s, normal-looking, in his proper uniform, nothing visibly out of the ordinary. He filled up the tank while I went to the bathroom, came back, paid with my company card, took the receipt and put it in my folder without examining it carefully, because I had never needed to examine a fuel receipt carefully before. The truck drove normally, the engine responded normally, and I drank my coffee thinking about the time of day. The next 80 miles were completely silent. The power loss started on a long uphill climb after Santa Fe, the kind of ramp where you feel the engine working harder, but that normally doesn't change anything in the truck's behavior. This time it did. The RPMs went up, but the speed didn't keep up, as if the engine was losing efficiency in real time, and I downshifted, then downshifted, and managed to maintain enough speed to avoid becoming a problem in traffic. When the road leveled out, the truck returned to normal, and I did exactly what an experienced driver does when something seems wrong but not critical. I mentally registered it and continued. I did this twice. The second climb was worse than the first, the power loss more evident, and this time it took longer for the engine to recover on the flat stretch. I stopped on the shoulder after the road leveled out. Not because I was sure it was serious, but because 2 occurrences in the same stretch no longer fit the explanation of terrain and weight. I turned off the engine, got out, opened the hood, and looked at the engine for about 3 minutes without finding anything visibly out of the ordinary. Clean engine, correct oil level, no leaks, no strong burning smell yet. It was when I returned to the cabin that I saw the receipt slipped under the passenger seat. It had probably fallen out of the folder when I braked on the shoulder. I picked it up and placed it on the dashboard without examining it, but something made me look again before starting the engine. The receipt header was from the correct franchise, the gas station address was there, but the product code had a suffix I didn't recognize, unlike the previous receipts I had in the folder. I stared at it for about 10 seconds, trying to decide if it was a system glitch or something else, and I didn't get anywhere. I started the engine and got back on the road. The third climb began about 12 miles before Trinidad, and that's where the engine decided it wasn't going to pretend it was okay anymore. The power loss was immediate and severe. I downshifted through all available gears, and the truck continued to slow down anyway. That's when the smell appeared. A dry, burnt smell in the higher gears. The kind of smell you feel at the back of your throat before you smell it through your nose. I managed to reach the top of the ramp at about 35 miles per hour, with heavy trucks honking behind me, and I descended the mountain with the engine panting in a way I'd never heard in that truck in 3 years of use. I stopped at the first wide shoulder I found and called the dispatcher, a guy named Ferris who's worked with me for a long time and knows trucks. I described the engine's behavior, the progression since Santa Fe, the 2 previous incidents, and he was silent for a few seconds before asking where I'd refueled. I gave him the name of the gas station and the address, and he was quiet again. Then he said he was going to check something and call me back in 10 minutes. He didn't explain what. The way he said he was going to check something without finishing his thought worried me more than any noise the engine had made up to that point. I stayed on the shoulder with the engine off, waiting for Ferris to turn it back on, and I took the invoice from the dashboard. This time I examined it carefully line by line, and the suffix in the product code wasn't a system variation at all. It was a code that didn't exist in the franchise's standard catalog. I knew this because I had the company's app on my phone and went to check. Ferris called before I finished and only said that that gas station had changed management 3 months prior, and that the new operator's name had appeared twice in internal complaints from other transport companies. He didn't say anything more than that, but he didn't need to. The engine stalled on a long downhill stretch about 8 miles from the Trinidad border, without warning, without a spasm. It just stopped. The steering became heavy instantly, and I used all the strength in my arms to steer the truck onto the shoulder before the speed of the descent became a bigger problem, the tires scraping the asphalt as I tried to control the trajectory without power steering. I managed to pull over to within 3 feet of the guardrail with the truck more sideways than I intended, turned on the hazard lights, and stood there for about 30 seconds just breathing. The refrigeration unit stopped along with the engine. That was the second thing I noticed after my heart rate returned to normal. I got into the cab and opened the body temperature monitor, which runs on an auxiliary battery, and saw 38 degrees Fahrenheit on the display, still within the range, but the number was already rising as I looked. I called Ferris, then the client, then the company's towing service almost simultaneously, and while I was making those calls, the monitor went from 38 to 41 in less than 8 minutes. The maximum range was 46. The nearest tow truck was 40 minutes away. I did the math unintentionally and stopped halfway through because the result didn't change anything. I stood on the shoulder of Interstate 25 with trucks passing at 70 miles per hour less than 2 feet from me, looking at the monitor out the window as the number climbed, and I had nothing to do but document everything, hour by hour, degree by degree, because I already knew at that moment that I would need every record I could produce. When the tow truck arrived, the display showed 53 degrees Fahrenheit, and the client had already called 4 times without me answering any of them. The entire shipment was discarded 2 days later, a decision made by the laboratory after a temperature report, $92,000 worth of vaccines that could no longer be used. I had documented everything: time, degree, every call made and received, the invoice with the altered code, the history of complaints about the gas station that Ferris had gathered, everything organized in a digital folder that I sent to the company on the same day as the incident. I thought that protected me. I found out a week later that the company had used exactly that material to build a case against me. Their logic, which I only understood when the lawyer explained it to me, was that the invoice with the irregular code proved that I had refueled at a gas station with a history of problems and hadn't interrupted my trip when the first signs appeared. Negligence in the mechanical failure response protocol was the term they used. The fact that I had never received training on how to identify adulterated fuel, or that no company protocol covered this specific scenario, didn't enter the initial equation. The preventive suspension turned into dismissal for just cause before the fuel report was ready. The report confirmed adulteration 3 weeks after my dismissal. a mixture with the wrong proportion of biodiesel that progressively degrades the injection system under heavy loads and high temperatures, exactly the profile of my route that day. The investigation into the gas station attendant continued for months, and I followed it through what I could find. But I was never called back, never received a formal explanation, never saw the company acknowledge in writing that the material I produced to protect myself had been used against me. I was exonerated in a page-and-a-half document without an apology, the same format as always. I went back to driving about 2 months later, a different job, a smaller company, without refrigerated cargo for quite some time. The first time I stopped to refuel at a well-known franchise was on a typical morning in Arizona. A clean station, normal traffic, nothing visibly out of the ordinary. The attendant approached the truck and I unlocked the tank seal from the inside before getting out, something I had never done before because I had never needed to. I stood next to the truck while he refueled, watching the nozzle, the gauge, his hands, making no attempt to hide that I was observing. He didn't do anything wrong. He filled up the tank, locked the nozzle, printed the receipt, and handed it to me without really looking at me. I took the receipt, checked the product code line by line right there before putting it away, photographed it with my cell phone, and wrote down the time and pump number in the notebook I keep in the cabin. Everything was correct. Everything was standard. And even so, I stood there for about 30 seconds after he left, staring at the closed tank, waiting for something that didn't come and that I wouldn't know how to name even if it did. I still do this at every gas station, not out of protocol, not out of obligation. It's just that trusting a well-known franchise station was exactly the mistake someone expected me to make, and I made it, and $92,000 worth of vaccines went to waste because of it. So now I stand there, observe, check, photograph, and wait for that feeling to pass. It always passes, but it never completely disappears. It was a Thursday, 11:46 a.m. I was at a gas station in Oklahoma City waiting for my delivery window to open when I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. No text, just a link. I opened it without thinking, which was stupid of me, and it was a 23-second video filmed from above and from the side, showing the inside of my cab with the lights off and me sleeping in the reclined seat. The footage was clear. You could see my face, you could see the truck's license plate through the window. The message that followed said the sender knew my entire route. The rest stop where I stopped is on an exit off Interstate 40 on the east side of Oklahoma City, the kind of place you use because it's convenient, not because it's good. It had about 15 truck parking spaces, half occupied when I arrived around 11 at night, with that kind of yellowish lighting that illuminates poorly and creates shadows in the wrong places. I parked in the second aisle because the first was full, a space in the middle of the row with a truck on each side, which usually makes me feel safer than being on an exposed edge. I got out, used the bathroom, came back, closed the curtains, and lay down. Nothing out of the ordinary. What I didn't quite process at the time, and which only made sense much later, was that the light on the lamppost closest to my space was flickering irregularly. Not the constant flickering of a burnt-out bulb, but an interval that seemed almost controlled. I registered it as overdue maintenance and ignored it. There was also a car parked in the light vehicle area with its engine running for at least half an hour after I arrived. I could hear the low rumble through the half-closed window, but urban rest stops have strange activity all night long, and I've learned not to pay attention to it. The curtains in my cabin never close completely on the passenger side. There's a gap of about 3 inches in the center that I've always intended to fix but never did. That night I closed them the way I always do, which is the wrong way, and lay down, exhausted from about 10 hours on the road. The rest stop got quieter after midnight, and I slept soundly until 6:15 in the morning. I left the parking space, drove to Oklahoma City to wait for the delivery window, and it wasn't until 3 hours later that my cell phone vibrated with that message. I stared at that message for about 5 minutes without moving it, trying to decide if it was a generic scam, if someone had filmed the truck from the outside and edited it to look more intrusive than it was, if I should ignore it, reply, or call the number. The video didn't seem edited. The sharpness was too good for a cell phone camera at that distance, and the angle was high, from above and slightly to the side, You could see details of the interior that don't appear in a filming through the window. I decided to go back to the rest stop before doing anything else. I can't explain exactly why. I think I needed to see the place during the day to understand what had been possible that night. I arrived there about 40 minutes later and parked in the same spot where I had slept. During the day, the place seemed smaller and more exposed than I remembered. The shadows from the previous night were gone, and you could clearly see the lamppost that was about 15 feet from the side of my truck. I climbed onto the running board to gain height and looked at the top of the pole, and there was something there. Small, dark, installed below the light fixture on a bracket that seemed to be part of the structure but was too new compared to the rusty metal of the pole. A small camera, lens pointed towards the parking space aisle. The problem was when I got the video again and tried to mentally superimpose the angle of the pole camera with what was recorded. The pole camera captured the exterior side of the truck and part of the driver's window, but the video clearly showed the interior of the cab, my face, the seat, the details of the ceiling. I stood there in the parking space looking at the pole and then at the truck and then at the pole again, trying to find an angle that would make the two coincide, and I couldn't. The pole camera explained part of what was filmed, only part. I was still in the rest stop parking lot when the second message arrived, and this time it was text. The sender said that same night, between midnight and 2 in the morning, there had been a hit and run on an access road less than half a mile from that rest stop. A man dead, cameras in the area with limited coverage, and that the video he had showed me in a nearby location at the time of the incident. It wasn't a direct accusation, it was more of a suggestion, the kind of sentence constructed to leave both interpretations open at the same time. I reread it 3 times trying to find exactly where the threat was. And the problem was that it was in everything and in nothing at the same time. I replied by asking what he wanted. The response took about 4 minutes and came in 2 parts. First an amount, then a deadline. The amount was high enough to be no joke and low enough to seem calculated, the kind of number someone chooses after thinking about how much the other person can pay without going broke. I stared at the number and the deadline and realized I was being treated like someone who had already decided to pay, that the negotiation in the blackmailer's mind had already happened and I hadn't been consulted. Then came the third message, just an address. It was the warehouse in Tulsa where I was going to deliver it that afternoon. I pulled out of the rest stop and drove slowly, trying to think, and with each mile the feeling of being watched in real time became more concrete and less paranoid. He knew my next destination, knew my probable time, knew details of the interior of my cabin that no street camera could explain. I took out my cell phone and looked around the cabin while driving, which was stupid, but I couldn't stay still with that information. I glanced at the dashboard, the ceiling, the mirrors, and found nothing. But the feeling that something was there that I wasn't seeing didn't go away for a moment during those 40 or so miles to Tulsa. I arrived at the warehouse in Tulsa about 20 minutes early and parked in the unloading queue, which gave me time I didn't want because being stuck with that message on my mind is worse than actually driving. I fiddled with my phone for about 5 minutes without being able to focus on anything. Then I turned off the screen and stared at the cabin for no specific reason. And that's when the rearview mirror caught my attention in a way I can't quite explain. It was slightly tilted to the right, about 2 degrees, nothing you'd notice while driving. But I know exactly how that mirror is adjusted because I spend years looking at it. I slowly stood up and put my hand on the mirror to readjust it. And before I could see, I felt a slight resistance in the lower right corner, as if something was stuck between the mirror and the holder. I pulled the mirror slightly forward and the SD card fell onto the seat before I could catch it. A small black card with double-sided tape still stuck to one of the edges. I stared at it in the palm of my hand for a while. I can't quite measure it. It wasn't the camera, just the card, which meant the camera itself had been removed at some point. But the card had remained, forgotten or left on purpose. There was no way to know. What was harder than finding the card was understanding the sequence of events. Someone had entered my cabin before that trip, not at the rest stop, installed equipment, recorded, removed the camera, and left the card. The rest stop was chosen or monitored because someone already knew my route far enough in advance to prepare all of this. I sat in the waiting line at the storage facility in Tulsa with an SD card in my hand, certain that the video from that night was only the material the blackmailer had chosen to show me, not necessarily everything he had recorded. I filed a report that same afternoon after finishing the delivery at a police station in Tulsa, where an officer spent about 40 minutes writing everything down with an expression I couldn't quite read. Neither skepticism nor urgency, just procedure. I handed over the SD card inside a plastic bag I'd asked for at the warehouse counter before leaving. I thought I'd done the right thing. It took the forensic team 11 days to report that the card's contents had been partially overwritten, probably by automatic loop recording cycles, and that the recoverable material was insufficient to identify who had installed the device. The blackmailer's phone number was a disposable VoIP number. The tracking was completed in 48 hours. The parallel problem was that the hit and run that night remained unsolved for weeks, and my name appeared in the file as someone present in the area at the time of the incident, not as a formal suspect, but as mentioned in an active investigation, which in practice means the same thing in terms of how people react when they find out. My dispatcher found out when the police called to confirm my route that night, and although he never said anything directly, I felt the change in the routes they started offering me, less urgent, less valued, the kind of adjustment that doesn't appear on any document, but that you feel in your bank statement at the end of the month. I was formally cleared from the hit-and-run investigation 43 days after the incident. A 3-minute call from an investigator who said I was clean and hung up without further details. The blackmail case remains technically open, with no visible movement. The blackmailer never messaged me again after I filed the report, which should be a relief and somehow isn't, because not knowing if he stopped or if he just stopped contacting me are very different things, and I have no way of distinguishing one from the other. I keep driving. I take a good route when it appears, but the nightly stopping routine has changed in a way that I can no longer reverse, even when I want to. Before sleeping anywhere, I run my hand over every surface in the cabin where something could be attached with double-sided tape. Behind the mirrors, under the dashboard, on the edges of the roof above the seat, in the blind spots near the rear window. It takes me about 8 minutes. I do it silently, and I haven't found anything since that time. But stopping isn't an option my brain offers, so I keep doing it. The mirror issue is separate. Every time I get into the cabin after a stop, any stop, refueling, delivery, rest, the first thing I do is check the angle of the rearview mirror. It's not a safety check. It's not protocol. It's the kind of thing my body does before my head authorizes it. Most of the time, the mirror is exactly where I left it. But there's a fraction of a second, always the same, between looking in the mirror and confirming that it hasn't moved, where I don't know what I'll find. Chet Bowman, 11 years on the road. I've never been robbed, never been involved in a serious accident, never lost cargo due to negligence. What remained from that Thursday in Oklahoma wasn't the video. It wasn't the SD card. It wasn't the 43 days waiting to be dismissed from a homicide investigation that had nothing to do with me. What remained was that fraction of a second every time I look in the mirror. It doesn't go away. I hope these stories made you think twice before fully trusting the silence of the road. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the upcoming stories we post here. And if you haven't commented yet, take a moment now. Write down where you're from and what time you finished listening to this. This helps the YouTube algorithm recommend our content to more people who enjoy this atmosphere of mystery. Thank you for the company, and I'll see you in the next story. Stay safe out there.